let's talk about SEO, and let's talk about in particular, because I know we've touched upon it a couple of times in podcast episodes gone by, the perception of SEO and whether we've observed that there's a void or a gap between what we know as SEO sort of should be and what it could look like for brands and agencies today, and ultimately what the perception out in the Wild West might look like, and how those 2 points may differ. You're a man in the know. You're a man in the SEO
Depends
know.
who you ask.
So with your background in, multi-dimensional digital marketing, well, that for you.
I'll take that.
Should we caveat that we've got a puppy in the room just in case there's a woof?
Yeah.
It's not a human woof. Yeah, so let's talk about SEO, and let's talk about in particular, because I know we've touched upon it a couple of times in podcast episodes gone by, 50 of them. The perception of SEO and whether we've observed that there's a void or a gap between what we know as SEO sort of should be and what it could look like for brands and agencies today, and ultimately what the perception out in the Wild West might look like, and how those 2 points may differ, and whether that gap exists in your mind, whether you've seen the gap, if there is one, shorten or widen over the years. So I think it'd be good to set the scene with a little bit of your opinion or your observations on what SEO might look like in your opinion, and what you're seeing and how you're experiencing it today as an agency delivering that as a sort of multi-discipline program of effort for brands. How that looks today and how it might have looked previously in your career, how you've spotted any changes. Might be a good place to start.
That's a lot. I'm going to put that back on you to set the scene. I'm going to answer your question with a question, which is a really bad interview technique, isn't it? But
I'm just looking at that.
I think you being in sales,
yeah,
taking like specialism angles out of it slightly. If you look at the conversations that you've had in the last 24, 36 months, across the services that we offer,
yeah,
where has been the most resistance in terms of the depth and the mountain that you have to climb to?
Is it loaded question because we've already set the scene that we're going to be talking about SEO?
I'm just trying to get a market view of it before I dive into anything else.
I think there's I think it's always been, and you'll know this as well, like, I think it's always been met with what feels like more resistance. SEO I'm talking about, that's my answer, versus just use paid media, for example, just comparing the two. I feel just an easier conversation to have, because I think the perception is that it's a switch on and off, which you could argue some people believe it is. We can argue it's not as simple as that. And I don't see the sort of transactional, that level of sort of it feeling transactional being transferred or transposed over to people's understanding of SEO. I think SEO has always been, in my opinion, resisted, if we're going to use that word, more relative to something like paid media, because of, as we opened up, it being sort of multi-dimensional as well. So there's a lot of facets to it. I know our team, for example, you could almost chunk it down into our SEO team at Flaunt, sort of sub-disciplines. And I think that doesn't help it. But yeah, last 24 months, to be perfectly honest, throughout my career, SEO has maybe taken longer to get over the line in black and white. And a hell of a lot goes into those conversations. I feel like you have to have a lot more of the hand-holding conversations throughout an SEO conversation and opportunity, end to end. And I think you have to prove a lot more as an agency throughout those processes.
Yep.
Have you observed the same?
Yep. I think there's a huge lingering trust issue with SEO.
This is historical.
It's difficult to point fingers. Did you see the Verge article?
No, I haven't read it. I was on holiday. But I've seen the uproar.
So the Verge article essentially pointed the finger at SEOs for ruining the internet. Broad stroke, that's the premise of it. It's a detailed article, I've read it. It caused the SEO community to respond quite aggressively.
Yeah.
Obviously. And when I say the SEO community, I mean the authorities within SEO that either have really deep knowledge or do it well. So Danny Sullivan, prime example, search liaison at Google, came out with a rebuttal immediately, almost.
That's what you want.
So that community of people who responded is where SEO is at in terms of its complexity, in terms of how it should be done, in terms of its value. Where I think there's a failing is the perception of SEO that is still from 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that is, if you want to try and assign blame, I feel like the community of people who were aggravated by the Verge article are the people that are going to have to continue to educate around the complexity and the value. And it's going to have to become widespread. It's never been endorsed by someone like Google in the same way that paid search has. And I think, I mean, I have an agency that delivers both services. There's so much value in both. There's so much value in both when they're delivered together.
Yeah.
However, zooming out, Google has a platform in which, I don't even know the stats anymore, but the vast majority of money that comes in through Google is through paid search. So Google have created that ecosystem with a 90+% market share of search. They've got the levers to pull. And I think what's happening with things like the antitrust European issues, lawsuits that Google have come under, they've had to acknowledge that, and they've also then had to answer very pointed questions around raising platform costs. And it's something that is not exclusive to Google. Platform costs have gone up across paid in Facebook, everywhere else. But the ease in which paid is discussed versus SEO is down to the fact that Google spent the last 20 years marketing it, whilst SEOs have been almost brushed aside.
Yeah.
So the people that have communicated about SEO largely haven't been institutions. They've been independents or smaller businesses. So immediately there's a disproportionate amount of trust in who's communicating what.
Yeah. In line with that, and you read the Verge article, I haven't, and you were across a small cross-section, I imagine, of like the uproar and the responses. Were the more passionate responses, or was the volume of responses significantly swung over towards SEOs coming out? Like, what I'm trying to figure out here is, were the brands sticking their hand up and saying that's wrong, or is it? Do you know what I mean? It's almost like the same circles of the same rhetoric, the same narrative, i.e., SEOs, SEO service providers like us. Is there almost still that bias in the proportion of that noise that is, like you're saying, rebuttaling what the Verge article said? Is it still quite biased because it's just a load of noise from a load of SEOs that are saying, no, that's not right?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest, because I haven't spent the time in the comments and in the conversations. I'd actually like to see if there are any brands.
It would be interesting to see if they're flying the same flag.
What's hilarious is, I can't remember the chap off the top of my head. I can't remember his name, but he runs SEOjobs.com.
Don't know.
Apologies for not remembering your name off the top of my head. I can find it out. He, a couple of days after, stated two things. One, the fact that the Verge have had an in-house SEO team for a long, long time, and then that they were advertising a job for SEO off the back of that article coming out. Yet they were saying that SEOs have ruined the internet.
Brilliant.
And a large portion of the Verge's traffic has been developed through SEO as a strategy. So it sort of takes the shine off it. It did what it was intended to do. And look, there's some valid points, and I'm not saying that people who have been delivering SEO have been doing it in a squeaky clean way, because 10, 15 years ago, it was at a stage where the simplicity of it to deliver results was there, and there were agencies that capitalised on it at that point. There were brands that really sort of took the winnings out of that as well. Yeah. But it's a different game altogether now. I mean, you look at this year in isolation, and you look at the amount of innovation specifically around AI. And now what Google is having to do is keep up with the speed in which things are developing. So we've had 3 core updates in the last 2 months.
Yep.
That's not happened ever. Yeah. And I think Google will move to, in the next 12 months, almost like a live algorithm update. Live algorithm. So they won't have core updates anymore.
Right, yeah.
It will just be moving target constantly.
Which is quite telling and exciting to a point of being in the right place at the right time, doing the right things, we believe. What do you think, what do you see as doing the right things now? Like, I feel like I use the word, you've used the word, and I want to question us both on, like, the word complex and complexities of SEO. Do you truly believe it needs... Do you think this is part of the problem, that the word complexity, and it's complex and it's multi-dimensional, multidiscipline? Do you think that's part of the problem? Is it scaring people off to almost market SEO as, oh mate, this is complicated, this is more complicated than paid, for example? I know I keep using that comparison.
It's a balance, because yes, it's complex, but there's always been a right way and a wrong way of doing it, and there's always been a grey middle. Yeah. But failure is knowledge in SEO, so you've got to try things that don't work, and you've got to try things that you think will work, that if you're good, work. Yeah. But when it comes to communicating the complexity, the barrier that you face is because of the mistrust in the channel, which is legacy. So to get around that, we need to try and develop we need to build trust.
And are you saying that you feel like a big leap forward in that trust would be an institutional, i.e. a Google powerhouse coming out and supporting the SEOs?
It would help, wouldn't it? I mean, they are moving towards it. You've got people like Danny Sullivan, Search Liaison. I can't remember when he got appointed. John Mueller is very liberal in how he communicates things. He's still quite political about how he answers questions, but they are moving towards it because they can't deny it. Yeah. I think what I would like to be a part of is the industry moving towards standardizing almost how it's communicated.
Right, okay.
So from a metrics perspective, standardizing how we talk about it will build trust, because it means that you go to one agency, they tell you one thing, you go to another agency, they tell you another. Who are you supposed to believe? Whereas if there's commonality, which there is, digital PR, link building activities, if done well, builds brand, has 30 different metrics that you can report on that all benefit. We know the benefit. Things like share of search, we know that that activity over the long term, tying things into market share, looking at technicals, the depth of technicals, how that impacts your performance. Then you've got content. We know that there's going to be probably millions of pieces of content that are generated by AI every day now. That the importance of getting it right has never been as prevalent. But you need to do everything at speed as well, because the algorithm's moving so quickly. So the commonalities need to be unified as an industry and communicated. And I think we're making a good step forward with that, and the community that I talked about that responded to the Verge article are sort of flying the flag for that.
That was very reactive though, wasn't it? So it's like, as in reacting to the Verge article. It's like, what can, in line with what you've just said, is there not a question mark of the continuity behind something like that?
I think so, but if you look at Brighton SEO and conferences like that that are purely focused on SEO, and you look at the speakers and what they've been talking about this year versus 5 years ago, I think there's a lot of commonality between it. And I feel like that is exactly what I think should happen.
So in terms of the perception then, just really crudely speaking, if you flick back 10 years in your career, for argument's sake, say 15, whatever milestone really you want to go back to, you sat here today delivering the SEO strategies that we are for our clients, can you identify major perception change, be it outside of agency worlds, i.e. clients and brand side, or just step change? What's your observation on what that perception shift, if there has been one, and the magnitude of it? What do you see?
The difference is, 10 years ago, if I was sat in a pitch longer, 15 years ago, let's say, and I was sat there pitching SEO, it'd be probably results based. It'd be, we've done this for a client, this is the outcome, and the prospect, would buy that outcome. And it would be that the strategy and the technique and the mechanics of delivering that strategy were a lot simpler. Yeah. You buy links, agencies, whether they communicated it or not, they bought links, it moved the needle, there were technicals, there were content, it were at a smaller scale. That delivered results, brands wanted the results, they bought into it, whether they didn't trust it or not, because they wanted the results. Everybody wants to succeed, everybody wants more revenue, more leads. That's how it was. So if you got the opportunity to be in the room, it came down to chemistry, and it came down to how many brands have you done this for in the past and how do the results look. Whereas now, you think about the capability of a brand, an in-house team, a CMO, anyone being able to have the access to the information at the level that they need to validate what people are saying. It's a lot easier to navigate the complexity, but the complexity needs to be communicated because it is complex. However, it's still one of the highest returning channels, if done well, that you can do. So you still have an element of being able to sell the outcome easily if you've done it before. So you've still got a little bit of the old, but there's a lot of changes that have happened in the new, and I think the amount of agencies that there are now is another thing to consider. Yeah.
I think it's we're always going to have that battle as well, like you said 5 minutes ago, of the nuance of how it is delivered and communicated agency by agency.
I think another thing to consider as well is like the big players, the networks, WPPs, these kind of people have seen or foreseen the growth in digital. So your TV people have looked at digital and have either acquired capabilities or developed that as an area that they deliver, which has meant that it's almost like Fortune 500 down have started doing SEO because they see the value in it.
My final observation is probably in line with what you're saying there. Everything, wrapping up this conversation in terms of everything that we've both shared, I feel like from a front line speaking to people who are potentially thinking about SEO and know that they want SEO, I still feel like there's a narrative and an education piece that needs to be a continued effort as much as en masse as possible. Maybe like you're saying, I've never thought of this, but with the support of an institution like Google, propping this up and reinforcing the things that us agencies, us sort of service specialists are saying. I feel like the sort of objectives of and what you can get from SEO, so the results of SEO, I still think is a grey area in terms of the knowledge and the positioning of SEO as part of the wider sort of digital puzzle, where it fits in and what it can do for brands. I still think there's a disconnect there.
It's because brands generally think of SEO as, or marketing channels in general, as transactional.
Yeah.
Which is why performance-based marketing gets more buy-in.
Yeah.
Because this is how much you're going to put in, this is how much you're going to get out. And then what Google have crafted is, and this again, I'm not throwing paid under the bus because it's still an amazing channel, but in terms of this example, you get a ROAS out the back of your activity, and that just makes sense because it's black and white and it's transactional, whereas SEO needs to be, it can be measured in that way, but there's so much peripheral value and halo effect that it's almost difficult to quantify, certainly over a short period of time, which I think is where it starts to get difficult for brands to comprehend.
But that's circling right back to what you said very, very early on in this conversation. When SEO and paid work well together, I mean, there's no denying what it can do for a brand. We've seen it. We continue to see it. And the balance of how those two, the nuances of those two suites of activities and different channels that you'd be plugging into, and the different cadences of how that transactional or that brand benefit complement each other. It's almost like sort of rebranding SEO and paid holistically under just search.
Well, that's exactly what it is. It's search, and I think that the way that SEO needs to be delivered is completely different now.
Yeah.
It's going off just Google. People are searching across other channels and other platforms like TikTok, for example. If you're not visible at all those touch points, you're not going to be in mind at consideration phase either. So it increases the value of search even more.
Yeah, and let's be honest, TikTok's popped up last however many years.
TikTok's changed Google's trajectory.
Yeah.
And Google have showed their cards by integrating them into the SERPs and things like that. If Google want to try and be part of that journey, how do they do it? They become a referrer. If they become TikTok's biggest referrer, and then Google have some leverage, that they're going to go, well, we'll stop serving your results in the SERPs. Then TikTok might say, well, that's going to take X% of us traffic, so they're not going to want to do that.
No.
Google aren't daft.
No. They've got the opportunity to do it as well. I think the fact that TikTok's come out of nowhere in the last, I don't even know, I'm going to say 5 years, but I know we've been really honing in on it for the last 2 to 3 years. surely we've got no doubt in our mind that the search landscape is to change again. TikTok didn't
100%.
exist. So in other words, that very much like, I almost worry that SEO as the term has got such historical connotation that it's like, no, we start talking about it, or I know we do talk about it as search, not SEO, just because you're going to have those people who've been embedded within SEO for so long, or even removed from SEO, but they're aware of what they think SEO might have looked like 10 years ago. You're always coming up against that battle in their mind of rejigging, rebranding SEO.
I think in another 12 months, with the assistance of AI, we'll be in a position where collecting and interpreting the data will be much more simplistic. You'll be able to view touch points, platform agnostic, and tell the right story off the back of it.
I think it's where we've got to now is really interesting. I think there's a long way to go in terms of how it is communicated as I'd rather refer to it as search, to be honest, rather than SEO. But there's no doubt in my mind, and the conversation we've just had, that it's going to keep changing. And you'd like to think that agencies and service providers are very well placed, if they're doing the right things,
We have to be
to keep it on top of those. So
we
I
have
think,
to be.
yeah, I think our value in those conversations with brands who might have their in-house resource, I think the shared learning sector by sector that we would have visibility into.
Well, it's forcing people to do SEO in the right way.
Yeah.
It's not just like we've given examples. 15 years ago, you buy 100 links, you're going to get results. That doesn't exist anymore. You need content, you need UX, you need CRO, you need digital PR, you need... It's a brand channel ultimately that you need to build, and you need to be present, and it needs to be consistent. And Google have come out and said it needs to be consistent. Consistency wins. So
basically, SEO agencies weren't making it up if Google are going to come out and validate what we're saying.